it's Karen again. Today we're going to talk about the tattoos. Now, the tattoos were a very problematic issue all throughout the Hampstead hoax, and they're one which has raised a lot of confusion and concern, especially for people who are a little bit on the fence, don't know whether to believe it, don't know whether not to believe it. The tattoos can really be something that makes them think, well, maybe it was true after all, especially because many people believe that if they had been accused of these crimes, the first thing they would have done would be to go to the police and show them their tattoos or lack thereof, and therefore prove their innocence. So, of course, they ask themselves, well, why didn't the accused people in the Hampstead hoax do this? So I want to address the issue from beginning to end, just to give you a sense of how the tattoos got into the story, what role they played, and how the children didn't actually draw the drawings of the tattoos that we were led to believe they had. This is part of the Hampstead cover-up that Abe and Ella perpetrated on their followers and even on some of their supporters who were quite close to them. They just kept repeating the same lies. I guess it was kind of like Hitler: if you're going to lie, lie big. So I'm going to read to you from the transcription of some of the videos which were made by the adults of the children as they were coming home from Morocco to the UK. Now, this would have been at the beginning of September 2014, and at that time the children had been through a full month of interrogations, beatings, being burnt with spoons, being threatened with being buried alive in the desert, being suffocated by Abraham putting his hand over their mouths, being pushed into walls. The list just goes on, and it's really disgusting. I talk about this in other videos, and you can find it in the video about how the cult began. I'll put the link underneath this video. So in the discussion here, this is the one of the first times that they mention tattoos. And you can, if you are listening for it, and if you approach this with a critical rather than an accepting mind, you're going to be able to hear how the children were coached. So just take a listen here. So Abraham says, he's talking about an alleged cult member. Yeah, so he doesn't have any other marks, no tattoos, nothing. So right there, hint, this is what I want you to say. I want to remind you that these people have tattoos. And the little boy sort of quickly snaps to and says, no, yes, he has tattoos. So he knows what he is expected to say, and he momentarily forgot, and he tries to correct himself quickly so that he won't get hit again. He has a tattoo and pierce rings. What? Really? Abraham says, feigning amazement. It's kind of rich for him to be pretending to be surprised by this when it was his idea in the first place, but go Abraham, whatever. So, and then the little boy says, yes, and he has a pierce ring on his willy, at the end of his willy where it wheezes. And Abraham says, yeah. And also on his, balls. No, not on his balls, on his leg, down a bit. Really? Yeah, where your balls are. So, up, down, sideways, who cares? It's down there somewhere. He's really not totally clear on this, probably because he's never seen such a thing, and he's basically repeating what he's been told. If you're describing it, you're able to say quite accurately, probably by pointing to yourself or by, explaining in fairly clear terms exactly where the thing is. If you've never seen it and someone is telling you to describe it, you're going to repeat the thing that you think that you heard, even if you didn't really hear it that clearly. So, and then Abraham at the end of this says, very good, and praises him for repeating the story more or less correctly. He didn't quite get all the details, but good enough, whatever. So in another video, Abraham says, hi again, Q, and Q is the name that was given to the boy child in the Poffley judgment, so we're going to stick with that. He questions the little boy, who was quite younger and I would have to say a bit more easily led than his sister, who Abraham actually said that she was harder to control. So I think he tends to ask the boy for these sessions because he knows that it'll be easier to get him to say what he wants. I'm sorry to disturb you while you're having your breakfast, but we'd like you to tell us about the tattoos, please. And the little boy says, yes. Can you tell us in your own words? That's a strange way to say it. How else would he tell it other than in his own words? In other words, what he's saying is, we told you what to say. Now I want you to repeat it back to me in your own words. If he had actually originally heard it from the little boy, he'd never have had to say in your own words. That's ridiculous. So the little boy says, all of the 20 special children have a tattoo, except, says Abraham. So even there, he's correcting him in his pronunciation because he knows what he wants him to say. Except for me and myself. No, me, except for myself and my sister, because my mom isn't a member of the cult. Now, here's an interesting thing. People who are members of real cults, they don't refer to them as cults. Ever. You'll never hear someone refer to a cult, even if you know perfectly well, let's say they belong to something like NXIVM or, Church of Scientology or something like that. They're not going to refer to it as a cult. They will refer to it as an organization, a religion, a community, a group. They will never call it a cult because a cult is a derogatory term which people outside the cult use to describe it. That's just basic common sense. So how the children managed to get away with referring to it as the cult, and they sometimes call it the culture because they don't actually really know what a cult is, it's basically because Abraham and Ella knew that these videos were going to be watched by other adults and that they would understand the concept of cult. However, that they probably wouldn't get that people who are in cults don't call them that. And also all the teachers have tattoos, said the little boy. So-and-so has two tattoos all over his arms, and so-and-so has also got tattoos all over his arms. And also they have on their pussies, their privates. And Abraham says, and? He prompts him because he knows that there's going to be more. If you were asking the child to tell you the story, why would you say and if you thought that was it? If the little kid stopped talking, you went, okay, well, that's the story then. Okay, cool. And you put up your camera and you go away. But no. And also all the teachers have it, not all the parents. So all the teachers have tattoos on their privates. Yes, you say. And Abraham wants to make it clear that the little boy is saying this, not him, because he knows that this video is going to be for public consumption later. Yes. And what type of tattoos do they have on their privates? They all have tattoos. What? Yeah, I know that, kid, I know. What type of tattoos? They're devil or monster tattoos. Now, this is kind of like saying that members of a criminal gang have tattoos of Dr. Evil on their privates to show that they're all members of the criminal gang. That would be just comically ridiculous. It makes no sense whatsoever. So it's supposed to be a secret cult. Why would they have devils and monsters on their privates other than in a child's imagination? For example, if you look at the NXIVM cult, which has been in the news a lot lately, you'll notice that one of the features of it was that the leader of that cult had all the women members who were sort of in his favor, I guess, branded with a brand which basically was like an amalgam of his initials and the initials of his right-hand woman. And it's a very secretive kind of thing. No one who was not involved in the cult, and even some people who were in the cult, really knew what it meant other than some kind of a loyalty test. They didn't know what the actual symbol meant. Branding them with, property of so-and-so owner of the NXIVM cult would be just a little bit strange. You wouldn't want anyone like that going out and possibly showing to the public in some way, if they wore a bathing suit, if they, had sexual relationships with someone outside the cult, it would be an immediate dead giveaway. And yet Abraham seems to think that this makes perfect sense because, let's face it, Not a lot going on upstairs, Abraham. So it's interesting because when they got back from Morocco and went to Abraham's brother-in-law's house, Jean-Clement, they were discussing the tattoos, and Abraham had the children run through the whole gamut of, who has what where. And then Jean-Clement says, well, this makes it the most important piece of evidence. And Abraham, very surprisingly to my mind, says, no, it's not at all important. Just let that sink in for a second. Why is he saying this? So Jean-Clement says, the tattoo bit is the most important bit because, and Child Q says, and the rings. And Jean-Clement says, yeah, because, and Ella says, and piercing as well they have. And Jean-Clement says, yes, because on the private parts. And Abraham says, and interrupts him and says, it doesn't prove anything. And Jean-Clement says, it's on the private parts. It doesn't prove anything. I can put that on my private parts. It doesn't prove anything. Tattoo doesn't prove anything, Jean-Clement. Which is interesting, because he's just gone to a fair bit of trouble to get the kids to talk about the tattoos, and now he's saying that it's kind of useless. Like, what was the point of that? It's a strange little interlude, but I'll just continue here. Abi, let me finish. Abraham says, I'll let you finish. And Jean-Clement says, the tattoo, see, they can tell the name of the people, tattoo. And Ella says, you're right. And how could they see another person with that person's tattoo? Ella says, sorry, can you say that again? And Jean-Clement says, how would they see another person's private if they're not part of the family? Abraham says, that's right, how would they see them? Jean-Clement says, so that's what I was asking. And Abraham says, how would they see the privates? And Jean-Clement says, that's why it's so important for them to describe them. Abraham says, of course it's important, Jean-Clement. Look, I'm totally with you. The fact that they have... I was very happy to find that out about the tattoos. Yeah, I'll bet you were, because you friggin' invented them. The fact that they all have tattoos is one thing, and the fact that you wouldn't see someone, and Jean-Clement says, I didn't want to cause any, and Abraham says, you wouldn't see someone's private parts unless, as you pointed out, you were a close family. However, it still proves nothing. Jean-Clement says, why? Abraham says, 'cause it proves nothing. They may have seen it in swimming. I'm just saying, Jean-Clement. And Jean-Clement says, okay. Ella says, all the staff, all the teachers. So apparently, like, they've gone through this. She knows what she and Abe agreed that the children should say, and now he's suddenly going back on it? What the heck, man? And Abraham says, Mama, I know they've... And Ella says, the parents? Abraham, I know this, but what I'm telling you is that as evidence, it proves nothing. So it seems as though maybe he's seeing it from the police's point of view, and he's right. From the police's point of view, the fact that a child could say so-and-so had such and such a tattoo somewhere doesn't really prove much. All it proves is that maybe they went to swimming class together and were changing, saw them in the change room, or they were in gym class. There's multiple ways that a person could know about this sort of thing. If indeed it existed, which I think we've pretty much clearly explained why it probably didn't exist. Jean-Clement says, it's for them the most straight to anyone questioning. And Abraham says, why have these children been able to see this? Jean-Clement, that's right. Abraham, of course. And then they go on and on around the merry-go-round about this multiple times. And Abraham just keeps saying it proves nothing, it's not evidence, they could have seen it in swimming class. He makes all of the logical arguments against the tattoos, and they kind of leave it hanging. They don't really come to any conclusion about it. But I think it's interesting because it's pretty clear that Abraham is aware that the tattoo thing may or may not fly. It's kind of he's kind of taking a punt here. In terms of getting the kids to say it on the videos. And if the police get hold of the videos, then they're not actually going to take the tattoo thing terribly seriously. They might ask about it, but it's unlikely that it will be taken as evidence. Even more strange than the sudden 180 on the tattoo issue, from they're extremely important to no, they're not at all important, was that by the time the videos became public and went viral in early 2015, the tattoos had become the center of a lot of Abraham's arguments. In fact, he would go on and on and on about them to, everyone's disgust. And he had his friend Araya Soma put up a change.org petition saying that they demanded that the accused in Hampstead come forward and show them their tattoos. So clearly he'd completely reversed his Jean-Clement argument and was now really, really keen on having the tattoos recognized as part of the evidence against the people of Hampstead. So why did he do this? Well, there are a few possible reasons. One has to do with a filmmaker that many people in the conspiracy world in the UK know. His name is Bill Maloney. And Abraham said many times that Bill Maloney had refused to acknowledge the Hampstead hoax in a way that Abraham found acceptable. Although I have to say, Bill did go to one of the demonstrations outside the church, but really he has stayed pretty far away from the whole thing, and I think I know the reason for that as well. So it all does revolve around tattoos. We're getting to that. Hang on, just 1 second here. So yeah, what happened was that a number of years ago, in about 2012, Bill Maloney and a person named Christopher Fay coached a vulnerable adult named Andrew Ashe to make claims about Leon Britton. And those claims in part had to do with the claim that Andrew Ashe had been sexually abused by Britton. And one of the things that they said that they got Ashe to say was that Leon Britton had a mole or birthmark on his upper thigh, which would only have been seen by someone who had been sexually abused by him. Although, again, I am assuming that Mr. Britton probably at some point wore a bathing suit, but who knows. In any case, that was a big thing. And then a few years later, Bill Maloney was just breathlessly explaining to Lou Collins from the UK column that he had just heard that Leon Britton had tattoos all over his private areas, and it was clear that he was taking what they had originally told Andrew Ashe to say and transforming it into something more exciting, more dramatic, something that could be, that was a good hook for a story for the UK column. So fair enough. Okay, that's one of their strategies, is just make it big, go big or go home. However, Abraham only heard the second part of this story, and he felt that if he made tattoos one of the components of the Hampstead hoax, that would be like sending up the bat signal for Bill Maloney, and he would then understand that because this case had similarities to Leon Britton case, it must all be part of the same massive, child pornography, child trafficking ring that run by the elites and so on and so forth. You know the drill. However, what Abraham forgot, or didn't know in the first place, is that Bill knew that he was lying. He was well aware that he was lying. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that he just didn't want to get too involved or too close to anything that Abraham was saying, because it would draw attention to his own lie. And Abraham, who never got that, put up plea after plea and then rant after rant about how Bill Maloney had let them down and how he'd betrayed them and so on and so forth. All very histrionic, and clearly he had expected better. He had maybe been given a promise. That's a possibility. But there was discussion all during the fall of 2014 about how Araya Soma, acting on Abraham's behalf, had attempted to get in touch with Bill Maloney and had been shut down because Bill just wasn't interested. Now, I don't know who she was talking to or how that all occurred. I do know that that's what she claimed later and at the time. So clearly the tattoos played a role and were a vital part of the hoax and were important to Abraham in that they could be his key to fame and success. And unfortunately for him, fortunately for the rest of the world, it fell through. Now, another interesting part about the tattoo story is that according to what Abraham and Ella had the children say, the tattoos were on every single member of the cult except for their mother, and then later they would say, well, except for themselves, because their mother wasn't in the cult and so they couldn't have tattoos because she would catch on that they were in the cult. However, that doesn't explain something very important, and that is Ella had children with two men that she and Abraham would later claim were members of this mysterious cult with the tattoos. Now, how is it that Ella, who had children with these people, somehow managed to not notice that they both had these devil/monster tattoos all over very unusual parts of their bodies? Why would she not have noticed this? The only reason she wouldn't have noticed this is that they weren't there, and the only reason that they weren't there is that the whole thing was completely made up by her and Abraham. However, it was a part of the story that they had kind of a hole they'd forgotten to plug, basically. They'd completely forgotten about that aspect of it. So maybe Abraham should have stuck with his "the tattoos are meaningless" argument, but he didn't, so here we are. One interesting aspect of how it worked out when we continued to ask Abraham in about the spring of 2017, I'm thinking, about how it was that Ella had not noticed the alleged tattoos on her two partners with whom she had had children, is that Abraham finally cracked a little bit and sort of left a post somewhere saying, you know, he had it done while he was in California and after Ella dumped the loser, which is so wrong on a couple of accounts. First of all, how would he know that he'd had it done in California? Did he go over and check? Like, what did he do? Get him to drop his drawers and see what he'd done? And secondly, Ella didn't dump her ex-partner. In fact, the opposite was the case, and that is part of why she was always so angry with him. However, let's just take that as a given. So then at around the same time, Ella had an interview with an American named Nathan Stoltman. And prior to that interview, she had a little chat with Stoltman, and Stoltman, being possibly not the brightest of bears, repeated that conversation publicly. And what he said was that Ella had told him that when she had accused her ex-husband and her eldest son and her ex-husband's new wife of having been members of the cult, she'd been mistaken because, quote, she was under pressure. She doesn't specify what that pressure was, but we now think it's safe to assume that that must have been, the 2017 must have been at approximately the time when she and Abraham broke up, and she had felt pressure from Abraham to make accusations against her first husband and her son and so forth. And so that it was interesting that our pressing Abraham and Ella to answer the question about the tattoos actually led to Ella confessing that she had made up part of the allegations. Now, it's interesting too because the children actually they both mention their older brother and refer to him as a member of the cult, and claim that he sexually abused them. And Abraham also actually refers to Ella's first husband, and very clearly in the Jean-Clement audio recordings states that he was a member of the cult as well. So, it was kind of a 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing, or 3, 4, 5 birds, 1 stone, I don't know. But it was interesting. And it did lead to Ella essentially confessing that she'd made up at least part of the story. And when you confess that you've made up part of the story, I think that calls the rest of the story into question. No matter how gullible you might have been in the first place believing it, you kind of have to question, if she made up one part, what else did she make up, and what else is she selling you? I think the final thing to think about with the tattoos is that a lot of people have claimed that in the place of, like if they had been accused, as many of the people in Hampstead were, of doing these terrible things, the first thing they would have done would be to run to the doctor or run to the police and drop their drawers and show them that they didn't have the tattoos that the children said they did, and that would clear their names, and then they would be all done with it forever. That doesn't work. It doesn't work on a few levels. One is that the police would not be able to look at anyone's tattoos or anything that a person showed them by way of evidence without first either arresting them or taking a statement from them in case of a criminal matter. So they would have to, in other words, the way it worked was the police went in. As we've said, they did the investigation. We've done a video on that. I'll put the link below. They did the investigation. By the time the children had come in and said that it wasn't true, the police had already discovered that none of the things that the children had claimed stood up. For example, the swimming place that they talked about, the change rooms would not have been able to accommodate even a quarter of the people that they claimed were there. The church they went and looked at, and allegedly they were supposed to be able to have a place to store, I believe it was 8,000 baby skulls. Now, a baby skull is maybe that big. And the drawers in which the baby skulls were meant to have been kept were about that deep. That doesn't work. It just does not work. No matter what you say, no matter how you twist it, it doesn't work. So none of the things, like the refrigerator in the nursery where they said that the leftover bits of baby were kept, first of all, it wasn't locked, which you would expect it to be, and secondly, it contained nothing but leftover food for the nursery's kids at the church. So there were all sorts of things. When they went looking for the father's house, they weren't able to find it and identify it. When they went looking for their teacher's house, same deal. So the police had many, many reasons to say this thing is not real. The children have been forced to lie. Then the children came in and basically confirmed, yeah, we were forced to lie. The police also knew well ahead of time that Abraham, it was a long-term child abuser. One of the police involved had actually been involved in giving Abraham a caution just a couple of months previously. So that's it. It was all very clear. And since they didn't have any reason to arrest any suspects, they could not have arrested anyone in Hampstead and said, let me have a look and see if you have any tattoos. First of all, there was no reason for them to. Secondly, it would have been illegal for them to. Now, I did have a commenter recently on the blog, on this YouTube channel, who said that the first thing that he would do, because we all know exactly how we would behave in those kinds of circumstances, would be to take a photograph of himself and put it online and therefore show that he was innocent. Well, most people really are not that keen to take pictures of their private parts and put them online to say, oh, guess what, I'm not a satanic pedophile. Like it violates people's privacy. It violates their human rights on a very basic level. And if you choose to do that kind of thing, if that's what turns you on, go for it. But I'm going to take a bet and say that it's just not the kind of thing that most people would do. People think they might, but then when push comes to shove, I don't think that that's actually what people would do. And in fact, in situations like this, it's not what people do. People were actually horrified at the idea that they would have to humiliate themselves in public by putting up public pictures of themselves. And this actually may come down to one of the reasons that Abraham and Ella were so keen to have the tattoos. Like, you remember when Abraham said that the tattoos were useless as evidence, and Ella said, and the parents? Because Ella, God bless her, really, really, really wanted the parents to be humiliated. She had felt humiliated by them. They hadn't invited her to play their little reindeer games. They hadn't invited her over for coffee. They had ostracized her in some ways because she's an odd person. One last thing. If you came to this video hoping that I would basically help you find evidence that the tattoos really did exist, and that the Hampstead hoax was real, I'd like you to ask yourselves a question, and that is, let's say that you were falsely accused of a crime. It happens. Sometimes people do that kind of thing. And let's say you knew that you hadn't done it. And the police investigated the crime, and they discovered that there was really not very much evidence to pin you to the crime. And what evidence there was all a he said, she said kind of thing. Would you really want the police to continue investigating and continue thrashing around and insisting that you undress yourself in public, and people you loved undress themselves in public, and basically kept drilling around looking for evidence against you when the case had already been closed? I'm willing to bet that you probably wouldn't. I'm willing to bet that if that were to happen, you would see that as a gross violation of your rights as a citizen. And you would be right. And that is exactly what people have been trying to say should have happened to the people of Hampstead. And it's dead wrong. It is just wrong. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. Thanks very much, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye now.